Going to do something very different today on the show. We are chatting with Oscar Vasquez. He is the founder of EstateDocPrep.com, and he's all about helping folks with their estate planning. And something that most podcasters don't think about is what happens if something were to happen to me? What happens to my show? What happens to my brand? What happens to this business that I've put together? And Oscar is going to help us do that. Oscar, thank you for joining me today.
Well, I'm excited to bring some value and bring some thoughts into your head that most people don't think about.
It's funny. I just had this thought the other day about something completely different, kind of unrelated, but then I realized, this could work really well with podcasting as well. So first of all, let me just ask you, where did your interest, how did you get, make your way into the podcasting space?
Well, I got into the podcasting space because, I first started, I've been in the real estate industry for about 28 years. And then what happened is I started to help homeowners protect their homes. And then I read an interesting statistic probably in the summer of this last summer. And I kept thinking of a way to be able to bring awareness, but 68% of homeowners do not have an estate plan. And that means that the government decides on what happens to your assets. And so what I decided is I said, what's the best way to be on a crusade that's not going to cost millions of dollars, but that can give it? And I figured people don't protect their assets, whether they're digital or economical or anything, their assets, they don't protect them because they don't care about the beneficiaries or their kids. I think they don't protect them because they don't know how and that needs protection. So I wanted to join a crusade. And once again, thank you for allowing me to bring the crusade out and bring the information to now that people will know that, having a living trust is that. So 68% of people don't have it. We're on a crusade to be able to educate them and bring awareness to the living trust arena or the estate planning arena of how to protect your assets.
So when we talk about podcast estate planning in this case, first of all, if I'm just doing this for fun, I'm doing this as a hobby, do I still have to think about this stuff? Or is this only if I really treat this like a business or money-making venture?
Well, I think here's the situation. One, I want to define what is a living trust and how it could be used, right? Because if it becomes, and there's some aha moments there, because that is a loaded, but I want to define what is a living trust. A living trust is a contract between you, which is the parents, and the beneficiaries, which are usually the kids, and that the government enforces. Now, that is a living trust. It's your instruction to your kids on what you want to have happen with your assets. So if your podcast will be monetized someday, listen, I just created a living trust for a faceless YouTuber that has like 7 channels. He's still generating a revenue from videos that he produced almost 4 years ago. So is that something that's necessary? That's going to be up to you. If it's going to get monetized and there's going to be an income and you want somebody to benefit from it, then that might be a wise decision to be able to do that. Now, let me go in before. Is this something for you or not? I want to be able to tell you what happens if you have an asset and you don't protect it. And let's just say if you're a podcaster and it starts to take off, you never know what topics you come up. I mean, there's trends all the time. However, if you have an asset, a podcast that starts to get monetized and it exceeds let's just say in Colorado, it exceeds a $60,000 valuation, it's going to go to probate. That probate means that the court is going to decide on what happens to your asset. That's what that means. So one, if we have an estate plan, aka a living trust, then the individual decides on what happens to the asset. B, if you don't create an estate plan, then the government already has a plan in place, which means the government decides on what happens to your asset. So in short, if you really feel and you're committed to having a successful podcast and being able um, to create an asset or the gift that keeps on giving, because now it's a digital asset, right? Digital assets live forever. They outlive us. They may outlive everything depending on the topics and how the world turns. So my recommendation would be something to consider, to do that. And if you want to ask a question specifically, we have an artificial intelligence 24-hour receptionist that can answer any question about your business or how to structure that. And if that's something that's doable, and we'll give out that number in a little bit.
Very cool. So again, going back to podcasters in particular, should they then be considering more formal structures for their podcasts to make that transition from, them to somebody else easier? Or again, if they're not a business, right, they're doing this for fun but they're enjoying it, it's building up an audience, maybe somebody, maybe they want to pass it down, can they just say in a will, I bequeath my podcast to so and so?
A will. Now that's one of the biggest perception of an estate planning is having a will. And the reason why is that a will says, I love you, I leave you everything. That's it. And an estate plan is a comprehensive estate plan that is specific instructions on what you want. So if you have an asset, if you feel that the assets, and look, I just got into podcasting, but I'm going to tell you, starting to get to understand the amount of assets and the amount of things that come to play when you're creating a podcast. You got advertising, you got revenue. So the structure should be this. So in order for an estate plan to be effective, the estate plan needs to be the recipient of all revenue, so that way you can control it if you pass. So yes, if I think that any podcaster that is taking this serious, an estate plan should be something to really take into consideration to protect your assets, and more importantly, to protect the legacy and the additional revenue that keeps coming in if you decide to monetize it.
What about the idea of planning in general, right? You said that these podcasts have lots of different things attached to them, right? I've got a login credentials for my hosting plan. I've got login credentials for my Apple account, login credentials for Spotify. Then I've got my website. Then I've got my show notes service. How do you ensure that if you are passing this on to somebody else, if you want it to live on, that they are able to access all those assets on your behalf should you pass?
Yeah, those are called an asset inventory. One of the things that we started to add on was an asset inventory to social media. Like Facebook won't give you access to anybody's account, or any social media won't give you an access to the account if you're not the beneficiary, or you have a written power of attorney to do that. So yes, keeping inventory of your assets and what you can do with them, so you can re-edit and remaster them, that would be something that is part of the estate plan, and that should be something that you should take into consideration. But more importantly, you want to make the living trust is a revocable living trust that you need to put assets in. There's three things that make a living trust a living document that can be enforced by the courts. One, it needs to be signed in front of a notary. Two, it needs to be signed in front of two witnesses, so that it's beyond reasonable doubt that you executed and those are your wishes. And three, more importantly, it needs to have assets put into it. Because if you don't have assets inside your living trust, if you don't say, hey, that the corporation, if you become incorporated, or I own this podcast and this is my asset, and everything in my podcast, including but not limited to any and all logins to Apple, all the portions. I'm not too well versed on the wording of all the places where podcasts get in there, but you put all those assets in there, and this is where they live, and you put in a login and password. That is that is some of the parts of the estate planning, because if you pass or you become incapacitated, where do checks go? Where does the money go? And those are all. That's why you want to put some of the majority of the assets. Now, I've have been very fortunate. I own a few businesses. A lot of the income goes into our trust, as far as for our revocable trust. So everything is planned in case something were to happen to us. I'll give you an example. Um, there was a gentleman that had a bakery that we helped and created it. When, because of the estate planning, he created what's called standard operating procedures for his bakery, and then he ended up getting key person insurance, because that bakery was he was the main person. He was the main person to be able to function the bakery. And so what he did is he got key person insurance to be able to replace him if he were to pass. And that insurance policy was $1 million. So, for example, if you were a podcaster and you did many interviews and you had this on there and you wanted your podcast to keep living, but you wanted to generate the revenue, if you got an insurance policy that made the living trust or your trust the beneficiary to keep it operating, then that is another way on how you could create legacy money for your life, but your podcast keeps living on with your name and your business continues to generate some revenue while you're not longer here, kind of a thing, right?
Here's a scenario that I'm sure comes up more often than not. Let's say I co-host a show with a friend, partner. It is a monetized show, right? It's making money. Something happens to me. What happens to that show? Does it automatically all go over? If there is no living trust, if there is no will, if there is no declaration of my intentions there, does basically that other person just gain control of the whole thing, and that person's estate is maybe left out in the cold from potential future earnings?
Absolutely. And that happens more often than not. That's one of the scariest things, by not having a partnership, written agreement, or not putting your assets in, that you have a written, that you have a, because in order for the living trust be the benefit, or to be able to distribute and take action, it needs to be the owner of the asset. So you need to name them, hey, I'm the employee, or I am the owner, cuz as a living trustee, you control it, but you don't own it. The living trust does, which creates a what's called a corporate veil, protects you from everything else because it's an individual entity, in essence. However, that can be prevented, by being able to add the living trust as the owner, and and then your beneficiaries can benefit from that partnership.
Gotcha. Anything else that we as podcasters and digital content creators should be keeping in mind when we're thinking about the future of our digital properties and what we leave behind?
I think one is that, if you're generating any kind of income, that's passively, you need to have an estate plan. Period. You need to plan, because if that money is gonna has the potential to outlive you, you need to make sure the right people get it. Period. And I can tell you that the gentleman that I spoke to on the YouTube channel, he said that he sold one YouTube channel for 32 times revenue. Um, 32 times revenue. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. I've never heard that kind of a multiplier. But he said, because it's a digital content. So if it has any kind of passive income, consider an estate plan. If you own a home, you got to have an estate plan. If you own a home and you have young children, obviously you already have a business. If you have a podcast, even if you're trying to do this, as a hobby, we're doing it. Sometimes we start as a hobby, and then we get in, and it starts to you happen to get on a good topic, and you go viral with something, right? So yes, I would highly recommend that, something to consider. And I would love to give out. I brought a couple of gifts that I love to give to people, if that's okay. I got three gifts. I'd like to give one. I'd like to give you the phone number to call an artificial intelligence, AI, 24 hours a day receptionist. Ask her anything about your business, and she'll say how you could structure your business. And if you want to speak to a human, you'll probably get transferred to me or one of our estate coordinators. That phone number is 805 909 4689. 909 805 909 4689. Now, you can call it 24 hours a day. She doesn't take any time off. Well, if there's no power, well, obviously she's not going to talk, but you can ask her anything. The second gift that I wanted to give you guys today is I want to give you a comprehensive live estate planning guide. It has a ton of questions. It's a guide. It's a working document that you can put in. Now, full disclosure, if you fill in all the blanks, that is not a living trust. Okay? Just because you fill in all the questions, it's not a living trust. I want to give you that. It's estate planning, estate.prep.com/guide. Estate.prep/guide. We'll get that. And the last gift that I like to give you is a coupon code for the first 10 users. Is if you decide that you're a homeowner, you have young children, and your business is going to thrive, you want to prevent yourself from letting the court decide to make a decision on what happens to your assets, you can get a $1,000 coupon code or discount code, which is called Podcasting T. Podcasting T. We'll put that in the description. You could use that. You could save $1,000. Your checkout would be for a lifetime access to software with unlimited updates. That means every time you add a digital asset, you'll be able to update that and be able to get that on update your living trust at no additional cost. Average attorneys charge about $1,200 for an update on a restatement for a living trust. These are my gifts to you. Thank you for letting me bring awareness to all the podcasters out there. You never know when the asset is going to outgrow its potential or outgrow it, and if it's going to generate revenue, protect it from the government.
That is very generous of you. Once again, we are chatting with Oscar Vasquez. He's the founder of Estate Doc Prep. He just mentioned a phone number for an AI receptionist, a website so you can get your estate planning guide, and a coupon code PodcastingT to get $1,000 off. We will have links to all of that in the show notes so you can find it. But as he said, act fast. The coupon code is only good for the first 10 people who are going to use it. Oscar, before we let you go, we have a couple questions we'd like to ask everybody. The first one is there any place in podcasting where you'd like to see some things improve, whether it's listening, production, distribution, anything in particular that you would just love to see podcasting do better?
I just got into it. I can tell you that the technology, every day I learn something new. I've had this mic for 2 years and I never knew how it functioned, and I learned something. I mean, so simple, but it's going to make my life easier. So, I could say that if there was something that I can tell you, my experience been with podcasters is that there's some very gracious people out there. I think that um, if I had to describe most of the hosts, they were all gracious, helpful, and kind people, and I think it's a great community. I haven't had a bad experience yet, and I don't not today. I don't know enough about it, but that'll be something that I will take into consideration, and if I do, I will bring that back to you, Matthew.
Sounds great. Speaking of technology, is there any on your wish list for your podcast, whether it's hardware, maybe even some software that would make your life easier?
Yeah, you know what? I just found Riverside. I think is something that's probably the people that produce at a high level. We will become a host probably in here soon as I'm learning. I'm learning about it. I did get myself kind of get mic'd up. But as far as technology, I'm not too far in it. But what I would like to see is something that can take the podcast information and make it into clips without so much editing, something that maybe cut down editing. That would be
Well, if
so.
good news is you've already found that tool. Riverside does that. There are a bunch of others that can
Oh,
do it as well.
nice.
So you're on the right track. And lastly, are there any podcasts, one or two that you are listening to that are your absolute favorites? The ones that you will not let a new episode go unlistened, or you will stop what you're doing and check them out.
Yeah, you know what? I'm a big fan of Joe Rogan. I love that. I mean, you know what? Some of his topics and the people that he's got on has been there. I'm starting to learn more and more, and starting to see other podcasts. I like marketing podcasts. I don't not been a diehard loyal fan other than to the Joe Rogan one, because that's the one I usually go out of my way to. But I'm starting to listen to more and more. So thank you for that.
Excellent. Well, once again, everybody, we've been chatting with Oscar Vasquez, founder of estateDocPrep.com. Lots of great resources from him. Lots of places where you can follow him and check out what he's doing on social. We'll have links to all those there. Oscar, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Thank you for having me and allowing me to bring this awareness to estate planning that most people need. Thank you.